Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. The morning was damp and dank, like most of my days since Hannah left. At 77, every day begins with a fresh ache somewhere new and ends with the memory of someone who no longer sits across the dinner table. I, Roman Moore, have grown used to being alone in this house in Henlop and Acres, the same two-story home Hannah and I bought back in the 80s. It overlooks the bay, and though my arthritis makes upkeep a challenge, I do my best to maintain it. That morning, I was making oatmeal for breakfast, as usual. The kitchen TV was tuned to the local news, the only sound breaking the stillness of the house. I was just about to sit down when I heard a car pull up outside. Peering out the window, I saw Jaden's silver SUV. What the hell, I muttered. Jaden never came unannounced, certainly not at 7 in the morning. I stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in my old robe. 4 people climbed out of the car, my son Jaden, his wife Josephine, and my grandkids, Grayson and Juniper. Josephine didn't bother saying hello, just started unloading the suitcases like she owned the place. Daddy, Jaden said, forcing a smile as he climbed the steps. Thought we'd come for a visit. With 6 suitcases? I asked, eyeing the trunk as Grayson wrestled out another bag. We're planning to stay a while, Jaden said, avoiding my eyes. Renovations, remember? I told you on the phone. I didn't remember anything like that. Last time we spoke, 2 weeks ago, he asked about my health and retirement, nothing more. How long are you planning to stay? I asked bluntly. A couple weeks. Maybe a month, Jaden shrugged. Don't worry, we won't be any trouble. He patted my shoulder and walked into the house. Josephine followed behind, barely nodding, clutching her expensive purse and glued to her phone. Hi, Grandpa. Grayson mumbled, hauling bags past me. Hello, Grandpa, Juniper said, offering a weak smile before her attention drifted straight to her screen. And just like that, I was left standing on the porch, staring out at the bay and realizing my quiet life had just been hijacked. It took me 10 minutes to collect myself and step back inside. The house was already full of voices and unfamiliar smells. Josephine was rifling through my refrigerator, tossing things out like a woman on a mission. Roman, this cheese expired 3 days ago, she exclaimed, holding up a package of cheddar like it was radioactive. And this sausage? It's full of nitrates. You could drop dead on the spot. I stood there silently as she threw away groceries I'd only bought 2 days ago. I wanted to tell her that I'd made it to 77 eating whatever I pleased, but I bit my tongue. Jaden, meanwhile, was wandering through the house, inspecting the rooms while chatting on the phone. Eventually, he came into the kitchen. Papa, he said, Josephine and I will take the master bedroom. You'll be more comfortable in the downstairs room. No stairs to worry about. Something in me clenched. The master bedroom was the room I'd shared with Hannah for 45 years. Her pictures still sat on the dresser. Her books were still on the shelves. I'm quite comfortable in my bedroom, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I take the stairs every day. It's good for my joints. But Papa, Josephine cut in, you're 77. What if you fall in the night going to the bathroom? I have an upstairs bathroom, I said, growing irritated. And I've never fallen down the stairs in my life. There's a first time for everything, she insisted. Jaden, tell your father we're just concerned about his safety. Jaden gave me that look again, that odd blend of pity and exasperation I'd been seeing more and more over the years. Dad, please. It's only for a few weeks. Besides, the first floor room is cozy. Cozy. That wasn't the word I'd use. The guest room had a narrow bed, a creaky old dresser, and little else. But I knew it was pointless to argue. I nodded and made my way upstairs to pack. Moving out of the master bedroom took me the whole day, not because I had so much to carry, but because every object was tied to a memory. A photo of Hannah and me on the beach in Cape May, our wedding rings tucked away in a small box. Her favorite vase, still sitting on the windowsill because I could never bring myself to put it away. By evening, the house barely resembled the one I'd lived in for the past 4 decades. Josephine had hung sleek modern art on the walls, arranged her trinkets across the mantel, and relocated all my photographs. Jaden's enormous suitcase was parked in the middle of the living room like furniture, untouched. The second bedroom, once my office, had been overtaken by the grandchildren. From upstairs came the thump of loud music and the shrill sounds of video games. My quiet life had disappeared, replaced by noise, clutter, and a sense of disorientation. That evening, we sat down for dinner. Josephine had prepared something from the organic produce she brought with her. I felt like a guest at my own table. Jaden and Josephine chatted away about their plans, not bothering to include me in the conversation. We'll definitely need to repaint the kitchen, Josephine said, picking at her quinoa salad. That awful yellow is so dated. I looked up. But that's Hannah's favorite color, I said quietly. She picked that paint herself. Roman, that was 30 years ago. Josephine sighed, rolling her eyes. Nobody paints kitchens yellow anymore. I'm thinking light gray with mint accents. It'll brighten everything up. This is my house, I reminded her, trying to keep my voice even. And I have no intention of repainting it. Dad, Jaden cut in, we're just trying to freshen things up a little. It's good for the house's value too. I stared at him. Are you planning to sell my house? Of course not, he said quickly, but I caught the flicker of a glance between him and Josephine. Something in that silent exchange made my stomach tighten. After dinner, the grandchildren vanished upstairs without so much as clearing their plates. I began loading the dishwasher, as I'd done for years, when Josephine stopped me. Roman, you're doing it wrong, she said sharply. You have to rinse the plates first, or you'll clog the machine. I've had this dishwasher for 15 years, I replied, and I know exactly how it works. Jaden, she called out to my son, who was sitting in the living room with his laptop. Tell your father he'll ruin the appliance. Without even glancing up, Jaden muttered, Dad, just do what Josephine says. She knows these things better. I said nothing, just turned and walked out of the kitchen, retreating to the small room downstairs they now called mine. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and for the first time that day, the emotional weight of everything hit me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the worn photo of Hannah I always carried. What would you do if you were me, darling? I whispered, staring at her familiar, gentle smile. The days that followed only grew more difficult. Josephine quickly established a new routine in the house, without ever asking for my input. Breakfast was now at 8 instead of 7, completely throwing off my rhythm. My usual morning coffee had been replaced by some bitter herbal tea. Caffeine's bad for your heart at your age, Roman, she said firmly, handing me a steaming cup of something that smelled like boiled weeds. My favorite TV shows were dismissed as too loud and outdated. In their place, the living room was constantly filled with reality shows that Josephine liked or endless sports that Jaden switched on as background noise. One morning, after returning from my daily walk, I noticed something was missing. My record collection, albums I'd spent a lifetime gathering, had vanished from the living room. Where are my records? I asked Josephine, who was busy arranging decorative candles on the shelf where my record player used to sit. Oh, that old junk, she said without even turning around. I put it in the garage. They were just collecting dust, and Juniper's allergic. It's not junk, I said, my voice rising. Some of those are rare. They're worth money. Roman, she said, finally looking at me with that infuriatingly patronizing smile. Nobody listens to records anymore. If you want music, Grayson can show you how to use Spotify. I turned and left without another word, heading straight to the garage. There, my beloved records were stuffed into a bent cardboard box, sleeves crumpled and stacked without care. I gently pulled them out one by one, checking for damage. Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, first edition. Ella Fitzgerald albums Hannah adored, all tossed around like garbage. I carried the box back to my room and slid it carefully under the bed. At least there, Josephine wouldn't get to them. As for the grandchildren, they barely acknowledged me. Grayson was always rushing off, either to job interviews or out with friends. Juniper spent most of her time in her room, occasionally emerging to raid the fridge. When I tried to talk to her about college or her future, she'd respond with one-word answers and then disappear again. One day, I offered to help her with a school project. I can help you with your research, I said. I was a postal inspector for 40 years. I know how to organize and analyze information. Juniper gave me that familiar look young people have when they think you're completely out of touch. Thanks, Grandpa, she said without looking up, but I'll just Google it. Then she turned back to her laptop, and that was the end of it. A week after they'd moved in, I made a discovery that left me stunned. Josephine had thrown out my old photo albums, the ones I kept neatly stacked in the hall closet. Why would you do that? I asked, disbelief hitting me like a punch to the chest. I'd found them in the backyard trash bin, the covers streaked with coffee grounds and damp from the night's rain. Roman, they were taking up too much space, she replied casually, not even bothering to apologize. We needed room for our things. And besides, all those old photos can be scanned and saved digitally. It's much more convenient. These albums are my life, I said, pulling them out of the trash, brushing off the dirt and soggy leaves. They have pictures of my parents, my childhood, of Jaden when he was a baby. Jaden appeared, as he often did, only once the argument had started. Dad, he said, using that infuriatingly calm tone people reserve for the elderly. We're just trying to tidy up. There's just too much stuff. I turned to him, holding the wet albums close. This is my house. These things, they're my memories. I didn't ask you to clean up. But you live alone, Jaden replied, like he was explaining basic arithmetic. It's hard to manage a house this big on your own. We're just trying to help. Help. That word again. Help that looked more like erasure. I brought the albums into my room, the small one downstairs, and added them to the growing pile of belongings I'd had to rescue from Josephine's purges. The room was slowly becoming a museum of the life I was being pushed out of. Artifacts of a past someone else had decided was no longer worth preserving. That night, sitting on the narrow bed and flipping through the rescued albums, I started thinking seriously about the future for the first time in a long while. It was clear now, Jaden and Josephine had no intention of leaving after a few weeks, as they'd claimed. They were settling in, making the house theirs, piece by piece, redecorating, rearranging, replacing, gradually pushing me out. I felt like a ghost haunting my own home, watching my footprints slowly vanish. I picked up a photo of Hannah and me standing in front of this very house the day we bought it. We were so full of joy then, so full of plans. We thought we'd grow old here together, sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the bay. Cancer took her 5 years ago, and now, it felt like I was losing the house we loved, too. I couldn't let that happen. Somehow, I had to reclaim control of my life, before there was nothing left of it. Everything changed one rainy Sunday, 2 weeks after my house had become unfamiliar ground. I was sitting alone in my room, the way I had been most days, rereading old letters to Hannah and listening to jazz through headphones. Grayson had shown me how to use Spotify, which turned out to be one of the few helpful things that had happened lately. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window pane. I watched the drops trickle down the glass, remembering all those rainy afternoons Hannah and I had spent by the fireplace, lost in conversation about books and dreams and silly what-ifs. Then, a quiet knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I removed my headphones. "Come in," I said, expecting Jaden or Josephine, maybe with another unwanted suggestion or complaint. But it was Juniper who appeared in the doorway. Her voice was hesitant. "Grandfather, may I come in?" I blinked, surprised and strangely pleased. Since they'd arrived, she'd barely spoken to me at all. "Of course," I said. "Come in." Juniper stepped into the room, stopping awkwardly in the middle, her eyes scanning the shelves and stacks, the books, records, photo albums, keepsakes. It was the first time she'd really seen what my space had become, a shelter for everything Josephine had deemed outdated, cluttered, or disposable. "Wow," she murmured, taking it all in. "So this is where everything from the living room ended up." "Not all of it," I said quietly. "A lot of it, your mother just threw away." Juniper grimaced and sat gingerly on the edge of the bed. "Grandfather, I came to warn you." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. "I overheard my parents talking," she continued, eyes lowered. "Mom's decided her parents are moving in, Grandma Liliana and Grandpa Christian. They're selling their place in Rehoboth Beach." A cold feeling settled in my chest. Even if the house were twice its size, there wouldn't be enough room for all of us. But this wasn't just about space. "Where do they plan to put them?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That's why I came," Juniper said, nervously tugging at the hem of her t-shirt. "Mom and Dad, they think you'd be better off somewhere else." My voice wavered despite my effort to sound calm. "What other place?" "A home for the elderly," she said, barely above a whisper. "They've already found one in Lewis. They've even put down a deposit. They say it's nice, professional staff, no chores, no stress." Her words blurred as a wave of anger rose in me. Jaden and Josephine were planning to evict me from my own home, to make room for her parents. When were they going to tell me? I asked, forcing the words out. "Tonight," she admitted. "They're waiting for Grayson to get back from his interview. They want everyone to be there for the conversation." "Everyone," I repeated bitterly. "Everyone but me. I guess I'm not part of the family anymore." "Grandfather, don't say that," Juniper said quickly. "It's just, they think it's best for everyone. Mom says you can't live alone anymore, and they're both too busy to take care of you." "Take care of me?" I stood up suddenly, fueled by sheer indignation. "I've taken care of myself for 77 years. I worked as a postal inspector for 4 decades. I raised your father. I built this house with Hannah. And now they think I'm some helpless old man who needs to be shipped off to a nursing home." Juniper flinched, startled. She'd never seen me angry before. I took a deep breath, trying to pull myself back from the edge. "I'm sorry, Juniper," I said more gently. "I didn't mean to raise my voice. I'm grateful you warned me. At least now, I'll have time to prepare." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not going down without a fight." That evening, just as Juniper had said, Jaden called a family meeting in the living room. I sat in my old armchair, the one thing in that room Josephine hadn't managed to get rid of. She tried once, but I'd refused to move, and she'd never tried again. From my seat, I watched their faces. Jaden looked tense, rehearsed. Josephine was tapping her foot impatiently, waiting for the right moment to strike. Grayson stared at his phone, pretending none of it involved him. And Juniper, she couldn't bring herself to meet my eyes. Dad, Jaden began after a long pause. We want to talk to you about the future. My future, I asked, looking him straight in the eye. Or the future of this house. He hesitated, but Josephine jumped in, her voice syrupy and patronizing, like she was speaking to a stubborn child. Roman, we can all see you're having a hard time living alone. You forget to take your medication. You don't eat properly. The house is falling apart. We're genuinely worried about you. Oh really? I said, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. And here I thought you were worried about where to put your parents, Josephine. She flinched, and Jaden shot a quick glance at Juniper, who shrank back into her seat. Dad, let's be honest, Jaden said. Yes, Josephine's parents are moving closer. But that's a separate issue. What we're really concerned about is your health and your safety. So much so, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady though my hands were shaking with rage, that you've decided to evict me from my own home. We found the perfect place, Josephine cut in quickly. Pine Grove isn't just a nursing home. It's a community for active retirees. There's a pool, a library, group outings. I could tell she was lying. I'd read about Pine Grove in the local paper. It was the cheapest option around, constantly understaffed, and barely functioning. The place had a reputation for neglect and disrepair. I'm not going anywhere, I said flatly. This is my home. I'm staying here. Dad, be reasonable, Jaden said, leaning forward. You can't manage this house on your own, and we can't be here all the time. We have our jobs, the kids, our lives. I never asked you to take care of me, I reminded him. You came here and decided to take over. And now you want to shove me aside to make room for Josephine's parents. Obadiah, Josephine snapped, clearly offended. How can you say that? We're doing this for you. We're thinking about your well-being. Then leave me be, I said. Let me live my life the way I was before you came barging in. That's not possible, Jaden replied firmly. We've already made the arrangements. You're moving to Pine Grove in 3 days. And if I refuse? I asked, sitting up straighter as my heart pounded in my chest. Dad, Jaden sighed. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know this is inevitable. At your age, everyone has to move into assisted living sooner or later. Better to do it now, while you're still active enough to adjust. I looked at him long and hard, and in that moment, I didn't recognize my own son. Where was the boy I taught to ride a bike? The boy I read bedtime stories to? The boy I comforted when his first love broke his heart? This is my home, I said again, more firmly than ever. And I'm not going anywhere. If you won't go voluntarily, Josephine said, her irritation barely concealed, then we'll have to apply for guardianship. Jaden's already spoken to a lawyer. At your age, it only takes the testimony of a couple of doctors to declare you legally unfit to live alone. A chill crept down my spine. They weren't just taking my home. They were threatening to take control of my life. Would you really do that to your own father? I asked, turning to Jaden, still hoping I had misheard. He looked away. Dad, don't bring it to that point. Just agree to move, and everything will be fine. That's when I realized the truth. I had lost this fight. They were prepared to go to any length to push me out, and they had every advantage. They had youth, money, legal support. I had nothing but my sense of injustice and my fading pride. Fine, I said quietly. I'll go to your nursing home. But don't think I'll ever forgive you for this. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Jaden and Josephine took over the packing, deciding for me what was worth keeping and what wasn't. Most of my books, my lifelong stamp collection, dozens of old photographs, declared unnecessary and banished to the garage. Only my clothes, a few personal items, and select photos were deemed appropriate for Pine Grove. The rooms there were small, and, as Josephine reminded me more than once, clutter would only get in the way. Juniper was the only one who showed any real concern. While her parents weren't watching, she slipped some of the things Josephine had set aside into my suitcase. Books, letters, a photo album. Grandpa, I'm so sorry, she whispered as she tucked the album between shirts. I tried talking to Mom and Dad, but they won't listen. Don't blame yourself, sweetheart, I told her, gently stroking her hair. You did what you could. On the day of the move, I woke up early and stepped out into the backyard. A layer of fog still clung to the bay, the water shimmering silver in the morning light. I stood there a long time, taking it in, this view that had been part of my life for so many years. Hannah and I used to sit on the veranda on warm summer evenings, watching the sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Now, I didn't know if I would ever see that view again. Jaden found me an hour later. Dad, it's time, he said, trying to sound upbeat. The car's packed. I nodded, casting one last look at the bay before turning toward the house. His SUV was parked at the curb, 2 suitcases and a cardboard box loaded in the trunk, everything I was allowed to take with me. Josephine bustled around, double-checking doors and windows like she was wrapping up a business deal. She looked pleased, as if my departure was the final step in restoring order. "Roman," she called as I approached the car, "don't forget your medication. I packed it in the side pocket of your suitcase. There's a schedule printed out. Give it to the nurse when we arrive." I didn't answer. I simply climbed into the back seat and sat beside Juniper. Grayson had stayed behind. Something about an important appointment, he'd said. I was almost relieved. One less person to witness the quiet unraveling of my dignity. The drive to Pine Grove took about 30 minutes. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window as familiar landmarks slipped past. The old post office where I spent most of my working life. The park where Hannah and I used to walk hand in hand. The little corner store where I bought her flowers every Friday. With each passing place, I felt another piece of myself fade away. Pine Grove was exactly what I'd expected. A dreary, 3-story gray brick building surrounded by stunted trees and a perfectly manicured, lifeless lawn. Not a single sign of the active retirement community Josephine had described with such fake enthusiasm. Through the windows, I could see elderly residents slouched in chairs in the common room, staring blankly at the television. "It looks nice," Juniper said quietly as we stepped out of the car. "Don't pretend, baby," I murmured. "We both know what this place really is." A receptionist greeted us with a weary smile and eyes that had seen too much. She walked us through the check-in process, handed over a stack of papers, and led us to my room. A small, sterile space with a narrow bed, a nightstand, and a closet barely large enough for the few things I'd been allowed to bring. "Dinner is served at 5:30, she said without looking up from her clipboard. "Don't be late, or you'll have to wait until breakfast." Jaden and Josephine helped me unpack, though there wasn't much to put away. The entire process took minutes. So little of my life had made it here. Then came the moment of farewell. "Papa," Jaden began awkwardly, "we'll visit you. Maybe not right away. We have to help Josephine's parents settle in, but we'll come soon." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I never wanted to see them again? That I would never forgive them for this betrayal? That they discarded me for their own convenience? Juniper threw her arms around me and clung tightly, her tears soaking through my shirt. "I'll come visit, grandfather," she whispered. "I promise." "I know, sweetheart," I said softly, stroking her back. "Take care of yourself." When they left, I sat down on the edge of the bed and let the tears come. I hadn't cried in years, not when Hannah died, not even when the house started slipping away from me. But now, in this unfamiliar, sterile room, I wept. The grief, the helplessness, the loneliness, it all came pouring out. The first week at Pine Grove was the worst of my life. The food was tasteless, the routine rigid, and the atmosphere suffocating. Most of the other residents were far older than me or suffering from severe health conditions. Some no longer recognized their own children when they came to visit. I spent my days mostly in solitude, reading the few books I'd managed to bring, flipping through photographs, or simply staring at the ceiling. Occasionally, I wandered into the common room and looked out the window, hoping to see Juniper's car in the parking lot. But it never came. Then, on the 10th day of my stay, just as I was trying to force down something labeled chicken stew that looked and tasted more like wallpaper paste, I heard a voice that stopped me cold. A voice I hadn't heard in years. A voice I never expected to hear in a place like this. "Roman? Roman Moore." I looked up from my tray, stunned. Standing across from me was a tall, lanky man with a gray beard and eyes wide with disbelief. "Vincent," I said, almost not trusting my eyes. "Vincent Brown." It was him. We had worked together at the Postal Service for years, until he moved on to the bank. We'd been good friends, but lost touch after his wife passed, and he moved in with his daughter in Baltimore. "What the hell are you doing in this almshouse?" he asked, dropping into the chair across from me. I gave him a bitter smile. "My loving son decided I belonged here." "And you?" I asked. "I've been here 8 months, he said with a shrug. "After my second stroke, my daughter said she couldn't manage taking care of me anymore. I didn't have the strength to argue. We ended up talking through lunch and well into the afternoon, sitting together in the common room, the hum of the TV in the background. Vincent told me about everything that had happened since we last spoke, how his daughter had sold his house, how most of his belongings were gone, and how, eventually, he came to accept this new life. "But you," he said, studying me carefully. "You're still strong. You walk fine, your hands are steady, your mind's sharp. What happened to your house?" I told him everything. How Jaden and Josephine had shown up uninvited. How they slowly took over my home, made decisions without asking me, moved her parents in, and eventually pushed me out. I explained how I'd ended up here so they could have my house to themselves. And the house, does it belong to them now? Vincent asked when I was done. I shook my head. That's the irony. It's still legally mine. Jaden was supposed to have the deed transferred 2 years ago, but he kept delaying it. Said it was better to wait, avoid the gift tax. He kept saying he'd get to it eventually. You know, when I was no longer around. To put it bluntly, Vincent said, when you were dead. Exactly, I said, nodding. He leaned back and rubbed his chin, thoughtful. You know, Roman, if the house is still in your name, then you can do whatever you want with it. Like what? Like sell it. Sell it. The thought had never crossed my mind. That house was a part of me, where Hannah and I had built our life, where every room held a memory. Think about it, Vincent said, leaning in closer. They threw you away, Roman. Like garbage. They're living in your house, enjoying your things, while you're in here with watery stew and strangers who don't even know your name. Why not teach them a lesson? I stared at him. For the first time since I arrived, something unfamiliar stirred inside me. Not bitterness. Not sorrow. Hope. You're suggesting I sell the house, out from under their noses? Vincent nodded, a sly smile playing on his lips. Exactly. Vincent grinned, his eyes lighting up. Roman, I spent 30 years working in a bank. I know how these things operate. If the house is still in your name, you have every legal right to sell it. And the best part? They won't even know about it until the deal's done. I couldn't help but picture the look on Jaden and Josephine's faces when they found out they could no longer call my house their home. It would be perfect. The sweetest revenge. But then the practical question hit me. Even if I sell the house, where would I go? Prices are ridiculous these days. I probably couldn't afford anything decent. I've already thought about that, Vincent replied, squinting as if calculating the details in his mind. My nephew runs a real estate agency in Lewis. He knows the market inside and out. He might be able to find a buyer who's willing to let you stay, maybe in a guest house or an annex. There are plenty of wealthy folks looking to buy in Henlopen Acres. They'd jump at a property like yours and might agree to unusual terms just to secure it. I could feel it, a spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks. A sense of possibility, of control. A plan was taking shape in my mind. A way to take back my life and, in the process, teach my so-called family a lesson they'd never forget. Vincent, I said, turning to him with a new sense of determination, tell me more about this nephew of yours. True to his word, Vincent introduced me to Ryder Brown the very next day. Ryder was around 45, sharply dressed and sharp-eyed. He had a confident, focused energy about him, the kind of man who could sell you sand in the desert and make you feel grateful for it. We met outside in the neglected garden behind Pine Grove, the only quiet place not swarmed by the staff or occupied by residents. Uncle Vincent explained your situation, Mr. Moore, Ryder said after we exchanged greetings. And I believe I can help. You really think anyone would be interested in buying a house with an encumbrance like me? I asked. I'd spent the whole night turning the idea over, wondering if anyone would want a property with a 77-year-old man still attached. Ryder gave a smooth, confident smile, flashing a set of teeth that probably cost more than my first car. Mr. Moore, you're underestimating the demand in Henlopen Acres. Property values have jumped nearly 30% in just 2 years. A bayfront home like yours, with that kind of lot? Trust me, buyers would crawl over each other for it. And many of them would happily negotiate terms that let you stay in a guest cottage or converted annex. It's not unheard of. I hesitated. But Jaden's still living there. What's stopping him from contesting the sale? That's what worries me most. If the deed is in your name, Ryder said, and there are no legal documents restricting your rights, no life annuity agreements, no transfers of ownership with retained residency, then you are fully entitled to sell it. Your son could only challenge it if he could prove that you're mentally unfit or acting under coercion. That's exactly why they shoved me into this place, I muttered. Makes it easier to claim I've lost my mind. Which is why we need to move fast, Ryder nodded. Quietly and legally. I'll handle the paperwork, find buyers discreetly, and arrange inspections while your son's at work. No one will know until the ink's dry and the sale is registered. I frowned. But how would you even show the house without them finding out? Jaden and Josephine are always home in the evenings. We'll schedule private showings during weekday mornings, Ryder said without missing a beat. While they're both at work, we'll send buyers posing as delivery contractors, maintenance workers, whatever it takes. I'll coordinate with Vincent to ensure you're informed every step of the way. If you still have a key, we're in business. I sat back, heart pounding, not from fear, but from adrenaline. This might actually work. I'm locked in here. Do you still have the keys to the house? Ryder asked. I nodded. When they'd moved me into Pine Grove, I had tucked a full set of house keys into the inside pocket of my jacket. No one had thought to check or take them. Perfect, Ryder said. Here's what we'll do. I'll start arranging day trips for you. On paper, it'll be part of the socialization program. Places like shopping malls, parks, museums. Totally normal for retirement facilities to organize those. I'll handle the coordination with the staff, and when the day comes, I'll be outside in my car waiting for you. It sounded like something out of a spy movie, like a covert operation hatched in wartime. And the absurdity of it hit me. I was a 77-year-old retired postal inspector, plotting secret escapes from a care facility to reclaim my own home. But beneath the disbelief was something sharper, older, the sting of being cast out, and the quiet hunger for justice. What if Jaden or Josephine are at the house during the showing? I asked. I'll make sure the coast is clear first, Ryder replied without hesitation. Standard operating procedure in my line of work. Divorces, inheritance fights, hostile co-owners. I've seen it all. I know how to handle it discreetly. We agreed he'd begin the paperwork right away. I needed to give him a copy of the property deed. And, luckily, I'd always kept one folded with my important documents, tucked safely inside my wallet. Years of handling mail had taught me to always keep backups. That old habit was finally paying off. 3 days later, Ryder called me on the Pine Grove phone line. His voice was calm, but charged with energy. The listing's up, Mr. Moore. No address, just the neighborhood and description. And we already have interest. First tours tomorrow. He paused. You've officially been signed up for a day trip to the Botanical Gardens. I glanced around the empty room, then lowered my voice. Ryder, aren't you worried this might be, not entirely above board? Secret meetings? Sneaking around the administration? Mr. Moore, he said, firm and unfazed. You're a competent adult, staying voluntarily in a care facility. You still have the right to privacy and to manage your own property. If the staff thinks you're admiring begonias while you're really showing a house to buyers, that's your business. You're not under arrest. His confidence was infectious. He was right. I hadn't broken a single law. I was simply exercising my rights. Rights that everyone seemed to think I'd quietly surrendered. The next morning, I put on my one good suit, the same one Josephine had grudgingly let me bring. I joined the group of residents waiting in the lobby for the so-called Botanical Garden trip. I stood a little taller, shoulders straighter. When the bus pulled up in front of Pine Grove, I quietly slipped away from the group and walked around the corner, where a sleek black sedan was parked and waiting. Ryder stood beside it, smiling as he opened the door for me. Nice day for a real estate tour, isn't it? He said cheerfully. On the way to my house, Ryder briefed me on the first prospective buyers, a middle-aged couple from New York looking for a vacation property. They're offering a solid price, Ryder said. But they plan to do a complete renovation, which means everything left inside the house would need to be cleared out. Most of my belongings are already in the garage, thanks to Josephine, I replied bitterly. Jaden said they'd keep them safe, but I wouldn't bet on that promise. We can include a clause in the contract to ensure your personal belongings are preserved and returned, Ryder suggested, or arrange for them to be moved out before the deal closes. As we neared the house, Ryder slowed the car and drove past to assess the scene. Your son's car isn't here, he noted, but there's another vehicle in the driveway. My heart sank. Josephine must be home, I said. Or maybe her parents have already moved in. Ryder pulled out his phone and dialed. This is Cleanstream Plumbing, he said once someone answered. We've received a request for a plumbing inspection in your neighborhood. Will anyone be home in the next 2 hours? He listened briefly, then smiled and hung up. Nope, he said. The woman said they're out. Your daughter-in-law and her parents are at a furniture store in Rehoboth Beach, picking out new bedroom sets. For my bedrooms, I said through gritted teeth, fury simmering in my chest. Ryder smirked. Don't worry. Soon they'll be picking out furniture for a different house entirely. He made a U-turn and pulled into the driveway. We've got 3 hours until they get back. Plenty of time. A few blocks away, we met the Castillos at a coffee shop. They looked exactly as I'd imagined. Well-dressed, confident, and radiating the calm entitlement of people used to getting what they wanted. Mrs. Castillo examined the house with clinical precision, trailing her manicured fingers across the kitchen counters. Nice layout, but it's very dated. We'll need a full remodel, especially the kitchen and bathrooms. Mr. Castillo, meanwhile, stood by the living room window. Great view of the bay, he said, and the lot's big enough to put in a pool. I stood off to the side, silent, as these strangers discussed the house I'd built my life in, as though it were a worn-out jacket they planned to tailor or toss. Every room they spoke of gutting held memories, Hannah's laughter, Jaden's childhood footsteps, holidays, and quiet evenings. It hurt, but beneath the pain, there was something else. Relief, freedom, and the growing satisfaction that I was taking back control. I began to understand something important. A home isn't just walls and a roof. The true essence of it, the memories, the moments, the life lived, they all existed within me. No one could tear those down or remodel them. The Castillos stayed for about an hour, asking all the usual questions: utilities, roof age, foundation integrity. Ryder handled it all smoothly, occasionally glancing at me for confirmation. At the end of the tour, Mrs. Castillo turned to me with a polite but uncertain smile. "Mr. Moore, your agent mentioned that you'd like to retain the right to live in the guest house, but I don't see one on the property." "That's true," I admitted. "There isn't one yet, but there's plenty of space to build one." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "That complicates things. We were hoping to use the house exclusively for vacations. Sharing the lot with." She stopped short, not finishing the sentence. I knew what she meant. "With an old man?" I said for her, gently. "I'm sorry," she said, looking away. "I just don't think it's the right fit." "I understand," I nodded. "Maybe it's not." On the drive back to Pine Grove, I voiced my doubts to Ryder. "Maybe this guest house idea isn't realistic," I said. "Who's going to buy a place with that kind of condition attached?" Ryder shook his head confidently. "The Castillos aren't the only fish in the sea. Tomorrow, we have another showing, someone who might be a much better fit. He's not just looking for a vacation home. He's planning to move to Henlopen Acres full-time." The next day, my official trip was to the local history museum. Ryder picked me up just as discreetly, and after confirming the coast was clear, we drove to the house. Waiting for us was Nicholas Sanders, and he was nothing like I expected. I'd envisioned another polished city type with shiny shoes and an overconfident handshake. Instead, I found a tall, trim man around 55, dressed casually in rolled-up sleeves and slacks. His temples were graying, his skin sun-weathered, his eyes framed by the kind of lines earned from years outdoors. "Mr. Moore," he said warmly, giving my hand a firm shake. "Pleasure to meet you. Ryder's told me your story. I respect what you're doing." Unlike the Castillos, Nicholas didn't treat the house like a fixer-upper. He treated it like a place to live. He asked about the neighborhood, the neighbors, how things had changed over the years. He was especially interested in the history of the house and in my memories with Hannah. "I've always dreamed of living by the water," he said as we stepped into the backyard, gazing at the bay. "I spent the last 30 years running a hotel chain in the Midwest. Started with a single motel my father left me and slowly built it up. Last year, I sold the company to a large corporation," Nicholas explained. "Now, I can finally afford to live where I've always dreamed of living." "And you're comfortable with the guest house clause?" I asked directly, not wanting to waste time with vague politeness. He smiled. "Absolutely not a problem." Then, with a soft chuckle, he added, "You know, Mr. Moore, when I was a kid, my grandfather lived with us. He had a little annex out back, just a single room with a bathroom and a tiny kitchen. But to me, that place was magical. He'd tell me stories about the war, teach me how to fish, show me how to fix things. When he passed, I missed him, and those memories, deeply." Nicholas glanced around the yard, mentally measuring. "You could build a nice guest house over there in the far corner," he said, pointing. "Separate entrance, close to the main house, but still private. 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, maybe even a small terrace overlooking the bay. What do you think?" "It sounds almost perfect," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady and hide how deeply moved I was by his thoughtfulness. "I'm not saying you'll be my grandfather," Nicholas said with a laugh, catching my expression. "But I do value wisdom. I appreciate history. I like the idea of having someone around who's lived in this house, cared for it, and knows its stories. That kind of presence gives a place soul." I knew exactly what he meant. And for the first time since Jaden and Josephine had walked through my door with their luggage and big plans, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: hope. After the inspection, Nicholas made an offer that exceeded market value by 15%. His only conditions were that he would build me a guest house, designed to my needs, and that I would have the right to live there for the rest of my life. He also insisted that the sale contract include a clause granting me full access to all of my belongings in the house and garage until the deal closed. "I want to keep this fair," he said sincerely. "Your son and daughter-in-law wronged you, but I don't want any bad blood or legal issues clouding this arrangement." Over the next week, Ryder arranged a few more viewings, just to keep up appearances, but Nicholas and I quietly moved forward. We met with a lawyer to draft and review the documents. Nicholas even brought in an architect to start working on the guest house design. "It'll take about 3 months to build," the architect said, spreading out the plans across a table. "But I think you'll love it. Self-contained, your own heating and AC, a modern kitchen, and a bathroom tailored to your needs." As I looked at the blueprints, I realized I was seeing more than just walls and rooms. I was seeing my future. Not a drab, forgotten corner of a nursing home, but a warm, dignified place of my own. A quiet house by the bay, where I could spend the rest of my years on my terms. 2 weeks after our first meeting, everything was finally in place. We met at the lawyer's office in Lewis, and I signed the purchase agreement. Nicholas Sanders handed me a check for the down payment, with the remainder to be deposited into my account once the sale was officially recorded. "Congratulations, Mr. Moore," the lawyer said, shaking my hand. "The transaction will be registered within 3 business days. After that, the property will legally belong to Mr. Sanders." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been lingering in the back of my mind. "And my son and his family, what happens to them?" "According to Delaware law," the lawyer explained, "once the sale is finalized, the new owner has the right to request that the current occupants vacate the property within 30 days. Sanders nodded calmly. 30 days is more than fair. That should give them enough time to find a new place. As we stepped out of the office, a strange mix of emotions swirled within me. Relief, disbelief, and a touch of anxiety. The plan had worked. I had sold the house, reclaimed control of my life, and ensured my future. But I couldn't help wondering, how would Jaden and Josephine react when they learned what I'd done? What would I even say? Sensing my worry, Sanders gave me a reassuring pat on the back. "Don't stress, Mr. Moore. I'll be there when you tell them. Whatever the reaction, we'll handle it together." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful. "For everything." He smiled warmly. "Call me Nicholas. After all, we're going to be neighbors." On the drive back to Pine Grove, I stared out at the familiar roads, amazed at how much had changed in such a short span of time. Just 2 weeks ago, I'd felt discarded, powerless, banished from my own home. Now, I was a man who had made his own choices, who had carved out a new path for himself. And it was all thanks to a chance encounter with an old friend and the determined help of his nephew. As Ryder pulled into the Pine Grove parking lot, I spotted Jaden's SUV. My heart skipped. "That's my son's car," I said, pointing. "Don't panic," Ryder said calmly. "It's probably just a routine visit. Maybe he's finally doing what he promised and dropping in." I nodded, though I didn't quite believe it. Jaden hadn't visited once since leaving me here, and even Josephine, who'd made such a fuss about my welfare, hadn't shown her face. "What should I say if he asks me anything?" I asked, suddenly unsure again. "For now," Ryder said, "say nothing. The sale hasn't been recorded yet. It's better to wait until everything's official before you tell him anything." I agreed. Better to hold my cards close a little longer. After all, the best surprises are the ones no one sees coming. Mr. Sanders and I agreed he would pick me up in 3 days, once the sale was officially recorded. As I walked back into the building, preparing for the conversation with my son, I didn't know what to expect, but I carried a newfound certainty. No matter what happened, I wasn't a helpless old man anymore. I had taken back control of my life. Jaden did show up to visit, though calling it a visit would be generous. He stayed less than 30 minutes, mostly talking about how stressed he was at work and asking how I was doing, like I was on my deathbed. Not once did he mention bringing me home or suggest my stay at Pine Grove was temporary. No sign of remorse. No hope. Just before leaving, he dropped a comment, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, by the way, Dad, we're having a little get-together this Saturday. It's Josephine's father's birthday. He's turning 75. We're hosting it at our place." I couldn't stop the bitterness from creeping into my voice. "At my house, you mean?" Jaden frowned, as if caught off guard. "Well, technically yes, it's still your house. But you don't mind, right? We live there now, and Josephine's parents are already settled in." That word, already, landed like a punch. "They've moved in." He nodded, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, last week. They sold their place in Rehoboth Beach. We did some minor renovations to the upstairs to make it more comfortable. I hope that's okay." I looked at him, thinking about the sale agreement I had signed just days earlier, the down payment locked in Ryder's safe, the guest house blueprints, and the contract that guaranteed my right to live on the property. All of it still a secret. "I don't mind," I said smoothly, forcing a smile. "It's a big house. Plenty of room for everyone." Jaden visibly relaxed, clearly fooled by my apparent surrender. "I knew you'd understand. It's only temporary, just until we—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Until you find me something better than Pine Grove?" I suggested, keeping my tone pleasant. "Exactly," he said, not detecting the irony. "Josephine and I are exploring better options. Pine Grove's not where you should be spending. Well, not where you should be now." The rest of my days, I finished for him. "I meant the near future," he mumbled, smiling awkwardly. Then I asked him something that shook him. "Hey son, tell me something. I am 77 and you have thrown me in here. When do you throw your in-laws here? Or they will stay at my home while I stay here, alone." He gave a weird smile, trying desperately to avoid answering. "I know, son, you are your wife's bitch. Have a nice day, son." He hurriedly walked out. After he left, I sat by the window for a long time, staring at the parking lot and thinking about Saturday. Ryder had promised the paperwork would be officially filed by Friday. Nicholas and I had originally planned to visit the house that morning. But now, with the party in the works, I had a better idea. Why not reveal the truth in front of all the guests? Let Jaden and Josephine experience what it felt like to be blindsided, humiliated, just as they had humiliated me when they tossed me out of my own home. Let them squirm as the truth came crashing down. I called Ryder from Vincent's phone and told him about my conversation with Jaden. This could actually work in our favor, Ryder said after a moment's thought. If all the guests are already at the house, Jaden and Josephine will be less likely to cause a scene. They'll want to save face in front of everyone. But how do we explain my appearance? I asked. They didn't even invite me to the party. Simple, Ryder replied. Mr. Sanders can call ahead and say he's a serious buyer interested in the house. Jaden and Josephine don't know it's already been sold. We'll say Sanders flew in from out of town and can only view the house Saturday afternoon. That should be enough. It was a bold plan, risky, but I liked it. For the first time in a long while, I felt a rush of excitement. A flicker of energy I thought age had long stolen from me. Friday came and went, taking the final pieces of the sale with it. Ryder called that evening. It's official, he said. The deal is recorded. The house legally belongs to Mr. Sanders now. Then he added, I spoke to your son. I introduced myself as Mr. Sanders' agent and said my client was very interested in buying their property. At first, Jaden was confused, said the house wasn't for sale. I apologized, said it must have been an error in our listings database. But then I mentioned Sanders was offering well above market value. I laughed. Jaden never turns down easy money. Exactly. He said they're having a family gathering tomorrow, but we can come by for a quick tour at 2 o'clock. I told him we'd be there. Mr. Sanders and I will pick you up from Pine Grove at 1:30 sharp. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake, imagining every moment of the confrontation. Jaden's stunned face. Josephine's outrage. Her parents' confusion. Part of me was nervous, of course, but mostly, I was eager. Saturday morning, I woke early and got ready with care. I shaved, put on my only suit, and polished my shoes until they gleamed. If I was going to reclaim my dignity, I'd do it looking sharp. At exactly 1:30, Ryder and Thornton Sanders pulled up outside Pine Grove. Nicholas looked impeccable in a navy blue suit, worn with the effortless grace of someone long accustomed to fine things. Ready for the big moment, Roman? He asked as he shook my hand. Ready as I'll ever be, I said, my heart thumping. On the drive to the house, we went over the plan one last time. Nicholas would pretend to be an interested buyer until we got inside. Then I'd tell the truth. Stay calm, Ryder warned. If Jaden tries to challenge the sale, he might claim you were pressured or mentally unfit. Don't give him any reason. I'll be composed, I promised. But inside me, a storm was building. When we pulled up to the house, the party preparations were well underway. Cars lined the driveway. Catering staff hustled to and from the front door, arms full of trays, boxes, and silverware. Looks like quite a celebration, Nicholas observed, parking his Mercedes beside the other cars. We stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the house. My knees trembled, but I kept my stride steady. Ryder walked at my side, close enough to steady me if I faltered, but I wouldn't. Not today. Jaden opened the door, shirt half-buttoned and towel slung over his shoulder, clearly in the middle of party prep. Mr. Brown, he greeted Ryder, extending his hand. Thanks for calling ahead. We're having a celebration tonight, so time's a bit tight. He paused mid-motion, noticing me standing behind Ryder and Nicholas. His face froze, hands suspended in the air. Papa, he said, stunned. What are you doing here? Hello, Jaden. I replied evenly, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. I've come to visit my home, or rather, my former home. Jaden blinked, confused. What are you talking about? He glanced rapidly between me, Ryder, and Nicholas, clearly struggling to make sense of it all. Allow me to introduce myself, Nicholas said, stepping forward and offering his hand. Nicholas Sanders, the new owner of this house. The what? Jaden shook Nicholas's hand, but his expression was a mix of confusion and disbelief. Jaden, who is it? Josephine's voice came from deeper in the house. She entered the room wearing an elegant dress, fully made up for the occasion. She stopped cold when she saw me. Roman? What is going on? Why don't we all sit down and talk privately? Ryder suggested smoothly. I'm sure none of us want to cause a scene with your guests arriving. Jaden silently stepped aside, letting us in. The house was fully staged for the party. White tablecloth laid out, glasses sparkling on the long table, fresh flowers everywhere, and classical music playing softly in the background. Now, Jaden said, once we were in the living room, can someone please explain what's going on? It's simple, I said, keeping my tone controlled. I sold the house to Mr. Sanders. The deed was officially transferred yesterday. You have 30 days to vacate the property. A stunned silence followed. Josephine looked at me as if I'd just claimed to be from another planet. Jaden turned visibly pale, then flushed red. This has to be a joke, he said, his voice tight with barely restrained fury. You can't sell the house. You're in a nursing home. A fully capable adult, Ryder interjected calmly, who legally owns the property and has every right to sell it. There are no restrictions or conditions attached to the title. This can't be happening, Josephine whispered, shaking her head. We live here. My parents, they sold their house to move in. Just then, an older couple entered the room. Tall, sharp-featured Christian, and petite, neatly dressed Liliana. The Pollocks, clearly. What's going on here? Christian asked, his voice clipped and formal. Mom, Dad, Josephine stammered. This is Roman, Jaden's father. He says he sold the house. Sold it. Liliana looked at me with disbelief. How could you sell the house while you were in a nursing home? Through a realtor, I said dryly. That's usually how houses get sold. Jaden tried to regain composure. Look, there's clearly been a mistake. My father, he's not well. He's confused sometimes. He has lapses. Lapses? I cut in, my voice rising a notch. Jaden, stop lying. You know perfectly well I'm of sound mind. You and Josephine forced me out of my home. You dumped me in Pine Grove, a place that feels more like a warehouse for the unwanted than a retirement community. And you never came to see me. Not once. Except that one time. To brag about a birthday party I wasn't even invited to. We were going to get you out of there. Jaden protested. I just needed time to get things settled, to help Josephine's parents. Don't lie to me. I cut him off, shaking my head. You never planned to take me back. I became an inconvenience, and you threw me away. That's outrageous, Liliana interjected sharply. Jaden, you told us your father agreed to move into the nursing home because he needed care. He did agree, Jaden snapped, shooting me a look of pure anger. And now he's pulling this stunt out of revenge. First off, I was never asked about your in-laws moving in my house. Secondly, I'm not seeking revenge, I replied, holding my ground. I simply did what I wanted to do. Mr. Sanders made me a generous offer and agreed to build me a guest house on the property. I won't rot in Pine Grove anymore, and I'll no longer be dependent on your goodwill. A guest house? Josephine echoed incredulously, turning to Nicholas. You're really going to build him a cabin and let him live on your land? Absolutely. Nicholas nodded without hesitation. It was one of the conditions of the deal, and I fully support it. Roman deserves to live out his days in a place he loves, with dignity. This is insane, Jaden muttered, shaking his head. This whole deal, it can't be legal. My father was living in a care facility. He wasn't in a state to make such decisions on his own. Here's a copy of the signed agreement, Ryder said, producing a folder from his briefcase, along with an official extract from the property registry confirming the sale. All perfectly legal. Here are the documents which prove that Roman was examined and declared fully competent by an independent physician before signing the documents. Jaden snatched the papers and started flipping through them desperately, as if hoping to spot some loophole, some error that would nullify the deal. This can't be, he muttered. How could you? The doorbell rang. Josephine flinched and glanced at the clock. Oh God, the guests. They're arriving. Maybe we should cancel the party, suggested Christian quietly, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. Cancel it. Liliana looked at him as if he'd proposed blasphemy. Impossible. The food is catered. The musicians are paid. Everyone is on their way. Then you'll just have to carry on and pretend everything's fine, I said evenly. Mr. Sanders and I won't spoil your party. We only came to deliver the news personally and to discuss the timeline for vacating the house. Vacating the house. Liliana's voice rose in disbelief. You expect us, your son, your grandchildren, to leave? Where are we supposed to go? They can drop you at same place they sent me, I said calmly. You'll find a place suitable to your needs. You have 30 days. That's much more time than you gave me to pack. As for them, I really don't care. The doorbell rang again, more urgently this time. Josephine shot me a scorching look and turned to answer it. A moment later, she returned with a tight smile and a clearly forced cheerfulness. We're going to contest this, Jaden hissed under his breath. There's no way you made those decisions on your own. You were in a facility because of your condition. What condition, Jaden? I looked him square in the eye. You know very well I was perfectly healthy. The only condition I had was being in the way of your plans. The first guest stepped hesitantly into the room, an elderly couple I didn't recognize. They stopped short, sensing the tension that still hung thick in the air. Is this a bad time? The man asked, clearly unsure. No, come in, Josephine said, forcing a polite laugh. We were just discussing some family matters. Please, she added, gesturing toward me. This is Jaden's father, Roman, and his business associates, Nicholas said smoothly, stepping forward with a polite nod. The next 30 minutes unfolded under a heavy, awkward tension. Guests continued to arrive, unaware of the storm beneath the surface. Josephine and Jaden worked hard to maintain appearances, their smiles forced, their eyes darting nervously around the room. Liliana whispered heatedly with G in a corner, occasionally casting furious glances in my direction. I sat quietly, observing it all, not with smugness, but with a quiet sense of relief. Not triumph, exactly. Just the steady, calming realization that justice had finally come full circle. They had discarded me like an old coat, and now they stood on the brink of the same uncertainty they had forced upon me. Eventually, once the house filled with about 20 guests, Nicholas leaned toward me and said softly, I think the message has landed. Shall we let them sit with it? I nodded. The emotional weight of the day had finally caught up with me. I was drained. Nicholas, Ryder, and I moved toward the door. Jaden intercepted us just before we reached it. This isn't over, he muttered, lowering his voice so the guests wouldn't hear. I'll fight for this house. You can't just throw us out. I already have. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. And unlike you, I'm not stopping you from taking everything that's yours. You'll regret this, he hissed, his eyes dark with threat. I've already regretted plenty, Jaden, I said quietly, my heart aching despite my resolve. I regret not seeing who you were becoming. I regret letting you and Josephine manipulate me, walk all over me. But I will never regret standing up for myself. I walked out without another glance. Nicholas and Ryder flanked me, and once we were in the car, I finally exhaled, deeply, fully. You all right, Roman? Nicholas asked, glancing at me with concern. Yes, I said, and to my own surprise, I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I really am. As the car pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of Jaden in the rearview mirror. He stood on the porch, watching us leave. His face twisted with fury, but underneath that rage, I saw something else. Fear. The kind of fear a man feels when he's no longer in control and doesn't know what comes next. It was the same fear I'd felt the day he left me at Pine Grove. I wasn't a vengeful man, but in that moment, I understood that the circle had closed. So, Ryder asked as we turned onto the main road. Back to Pine Grove? For now, I nodded. I'll pack. Then I'll wait for my new home. Don't worry about the timing, Nicholas added. I've already spoken to the contractors. Construction on the guest house starts next week. In the meantime, you'll stay at one of my hotels, at my expense, of course. Thank you, I said, truly moved. For everything. As we drove back toward Pine Grove, my thoughts drifted again, to the shock on Jaden's face, to Josephine's stunned silence, to the panic in Liliana's eyes as she realized they'd have to move again. Their carefully planned celebration had unraveled in the very house they'd taken from me. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Finally, justice had been served. They had tried to discard me, erase me from their lives like a forgotten obligation. But I had reminded them that I wasn't gone, not by a long shot. I was still a man who could make choices, take action, and defend his dignity. A new chapter awaited me, a modest yet private home overlooking the bay I had cherished for decades. There would be no more neglect, no more humiliation, no more bending to anyone else's rules. I smiled to myself. Maybe 77 years isn't so old, not when there's still something worth living for. But peace didn't come immediately. In the days after our dramatic appearance at the party, a full-blown war began. Jaden called me at Pine Grove repeatedly, sometimes multiple times a day. One moment, he threatened legal action. The next, he pleaded for me to reconsider. He even hired a lawyer to comb through the purchase agreement, hoping to find some flaw or loophole. But Ryder had been meticulous. Every detail had been locked in tight. Dad, you don't understand what you've done, Jaden said during one of the more desperate calls. You've left us homeless. Where are we supposed to go? We have kids. We have Josephine's parents. You and Josephine both have good jobs, I replied calmly. You can rent a place, just like millions of other families do. But the house was practically ours, he protested, his voice rising. You said you'd leave it to us someday. That sentence hit me like a cold slap. Finally, the truth slipped out. Jaden wasn't upset because they were truly without options. They could easily find a place to live. No, what stung was that their plans had been interrupted. Plans that assumed I'd die quietly and leave them the house like a forgotten relic. I never promised to leave the house to you. I reminded him, voice steady. I said my estate would be split equally between you and your sister, Abby. Abby lived in Oregon. She didn't visit often, but she never forgot birthdays or holidays. She sent photos of her children, called to check on me, and most importantly, never tried to interfere in my life. She barely visits you. Jaden snapped. She comes once every 5 years. At least she didn't send me to a nursing home so she could move in her in-laws. I replied sharply. After that call, Jaden switched strategies. 2 days later, Josephine showed up at Pine Grove with the grandchildren in tow. Grayson looked sullen and clearly didn't want to be there. But Juniper? She ran straight to me in the common room with open arms. "Grandpa," she cried, hugging me tightly. Her joy was genuine, and in that moment, it reminded me that some bonds still mattered. "I missed you so much," Juniper said, wrapping her arms around me. "I missed you too, baby," I replied, genuinely moved by her warmth. "How's college going?" I asked as we sat down. "I'm doing great," she smiled brightly. "I got an excellent grade on my economics project. You know I'm studying finance, right?" I blinked. I didn't. In all the time I'd lived with them, no one had ever bothered to mention what Juniper was studying. It stung a little. Josephine sat beside me, her smile stiff and artificial. Every now and then she chimed in with awkward compliments. "Roman, you look wonderful. This nursing home must be agreeing with you. Such a warm, inviting place," she said, gesturing vaguely around the drab, warm common room like it was a luxury retreat. "When are you parents moving here, Josephine?" I asked with sarcasm. She was quiet. "I knew that. So why don't you stop with this bullshit-carrying act?" I said flatly. "We both know this place is awful, which is why I'm so relieved I'll be moving out soon." At that, her smile faltered slightly. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "About that, Jaden and I have been talking. Maybe it's time to reconsider. We'd like to buy the house back from Mr. Sanders as soon as we can get the funds. And in the meantime, you could come back and live with us. Just like before." I almost laughed. Just like before, meaning shoved into a tiny room on the first floor, treated like a burden, ignored and dismissed. "Thanks, but I prefer the new plan," I said with a calm smile. "Construction on the guest house has already begun. It'll be ready in about 2.5 months. 2.5 months? She echoed, clearly taken aback. "And where will you live until then?" "Nicholas rented me a furnished apartment in Lewis," I replied, watching the shock bloom across her face. "It overlooks the ocean. I move in tomorrow." "That's insane," she sputtered. "Living alone at your age? What if something happens? What if you fall? Who's going to take care of you? First off, you don't care about me, so stop pretending. Besides, I've already hired a nurse. She'll visit twice a week," I said. "And the rest of the time, I'll take care of myself. I'm not helpless, Josephine, despite your best efforts to convince everyone otherwise." She pressed her lips into a tight line, but didn't argue. Juniper, still watching us, seemed to be piecing together more than just our words. "Grandpa," she said after a pause, "can I visit you at your new apartment? I could come up on weekends, help you settle in." My heart warmed at her offer. "Of course, sweetheart. You're always welcome." Josephine gave her daughter a sharp, disapproving look, but said nothing. The rest of the visit passed under a thin veil of strained politeness. As they prepared to leave, Juniper hugged me tightly and leaned in to whisper, "I'm glad you won't be living in that horrible place anymore, Grandpa." The next day, I moved into the apartment Nicholas had arranged for me. It was a spacious one-bedroom unit in a newly built complex on Lewis, filled with natural light from large windows, equipped with a sleek modern kitchen, and, best of all, completely free of stairs or thresholds. It was ideal for someone my age. The moment I stepped through the door, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of freedom. After the cramped, depressing room at Pine Grove, this place felt like a palace. I could cook whatever I liked, watch TV without headphones, shower without waiting in line, and, most importantly, sleep in silence, without the sound of a neighbor snoring through thin walls. Nicholas had thought of everything. The apartment was fully furnished and move-in ready. The fridge was stocked with food. On the kitchen table sat a folder filled with neatly organized documents, a contract with a part-time caregiver, a schedule of upcoming doctor's appointments, emergency contact numbers, and, to my surprise, a plan for investing the money from the house sale. I took the liberty of bringing in my financial advisor. Nicholas explained when he stopped by to check on me. "She's put together a few low-risk investment options, mostly bonds and dividend stocks. Safe, but they'll give you a steady income. More than enough to live comfortably." I was touched. Nicholas didn't treat me like a burden or a relic of the past. He treated me like a man whose opinions still mattered, whose life still held value. A week later, I met with his financial advisor, a sharp and respectful young woman named Adeline. She explained the various investment strategies with patience and clarity, never once slipping into the condescending tone that some younger people use with seniors. "Mr. Moore," she said, pointing to one of the charts, "with the proceeds from the sale and your existing savings, you can afford a very comfortable lifestyle. If we invest the majority of it here, she continued, tapping another section of the folder, you'll be earning about 3 times your current monthly expenses. And that's not even including your pension. As I listened, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, wonder, followed by joy. I'd always lived modestly, saved diligently, rarely allowed myself any luxuries. Now, at 77, I found myself in a position I never expected. I was well off. What am I supposed to do with all this money? I asked, staring in disbelief at the projections. Adeline smiled. Anything you want, Mr. Moore. Travel. Pursue hobbies. Support your grandchildren's education. Buy the things you always thought were too extravagant. Live your life fully. Live life to the fullest. That phrase echoed in my mind long after she left. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been missing since Hannah passed? Hadn't I been merely surviving, letting the days blur together without joy or direction? Not anymore. That same evening, I sat down with a pen and notebook and made a list of all the things I had always wanted to do but had put off because of money, time, or fear. A trip to Europe, something Hannah and I had dreamed about for years but never managed to make happen. A Caribbean cruise, warm water, blue skies, and no obligations. Photography classes. I'd always loved photography, but never pursued it seriously. A brand new wardrobe. My old suits had long gone out of style. And dinner at a good restaurant once a week. Hannah used to say, life's too short not to treat yourself to a great meal now and then. Looking at that list, I felt something spark inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing, I was living. I had purpose, I had dreams, and now, finally, I had the means to make them real. True to her word, Juniper began visiting me regularly. Every Saturday, she came by. We'd walk along the promenade, have lunch at cozy cafes, or simply sit out on my balcony talking. She shared stories about college, her future goals, her friends, her interests, and as I listened, I realized how little I had truly known about my grandchildren while living under the same roof with them. Meanwhile, Jaden and Josephine kept trying to wear me down. They called, sent letters, and even dropped by unannounced a couple of times. Each visit came with a new attempt to guilt me into helping them. Dad, we can't find anything decent in our price range, Jaden said during one visit. The housing market is brutal right now. Then maybe it's time to look for something smaller, I suggested. You don't need 5 bedrooms anymore. But we have kids. And Josephine's parents, he snapped, clearly annoyed. Grayson is already working, I reminded him. He can get his own place. And Josephine's parents made a good profit from selling their house in Rehoboth Beach. They can afford to rent or buy something of their own. If not, you can dump them in Pine Grove. It was clear they hadn't expected me to know so much. They thought I'd blindly believe whatever they told me, as I once had. Not anymore. When that failed, Josephine tried a different angle. If you won't do it for us, can't you at least think about your grandchildren? Juniper and Grayson deserve a stable future. I have thought about that, I replied. I've set up educational trusts for both of them. Money they'll receive when they graduate and are ready to start their adult lives. It was a suggestion Adeline had given me, and one I'd gladly followed. The trusts were airtight, structured in a way that neither Jaden nor Josephine could touch the funds. It was my way of helping the next generation directly, without enabling the mistakes of the current one. The money was set aside exclusively for the grandchildren's education and as seed money to help them start their lives. When I explained that to Jaden and Josephine, I saw their faces tighten. They had clearly expected to have control over any funds I might have earmarked for Juniper and Grayson. But what about us? Jaden finally asked. We're your family, your children. Aren't you going to leave anything to us? I looked at them both, hoping, just for a moment, to find some flicker of genuine care or affection. But all I saw was entitlement, frustration, and thinly veiled resentment. I've already given you more than you deserve, I said evenly. You lived in my house, used my things, and made decisions for me as if I no longer mattered. Now, it's my time to live for myself. After that, the calls became shorter, the visits more sporadic. Eventually, they gave up trying to persuade or guilt-trip me. They had finally realized that the control they once had over me was gone. Meanwhile, construction on the guest house was moving faster than expected. Nicholas kept me updated with pictures and videos, always checking in about color palettes, furniture layouts, and design details. He treated the project like a personal mission, as if he were building a home for himself. I always dreamed of having a big family, he told me one day as we walked around the site. But my wife passed away young, and we never had children. I threw myself into business. Only recently did I realize I'd missed the most important part of life. It's never too late to start a family, I said. Maybe not by blood, but with people who care, people you choose. He looked at me thoughtfully. You know, Roman, I'm glad we met. You remind me a lot of my father. The same honesty, quiet strength, and dignity. I always admired those traits. In the 2 months I'd spent living in Lewis, I felt like a new man. My daily walks along the seafront had improved my health, a fresh wardrobe and haircut gave me confidence, and the independence to manage my own time and finances rekindled a sense of dignity I'd long forgotten. I enrolled in a photography course at a local college, where I met a lively group of fellow students, most around my age. We often met up for early morning shoots, capturing sunrises over the bay, old fishing boats, and the town's charming architecture. Among my new acquaintances was Maria Pringle, a sharp, witty 72-year-old widow and retired literature teacher. We quickly formed a bond. We went to movies together, tried new restaurants, attended concerts at the local Philharmonic. There was a lightness to our time together, a quiet understanding. "You've changed, Grandpa," Juniper said one Saturday over brunch at our favorite cafe by the water. "I haven't seen you this happy in years." I smiled and passed her my phone, showing her the photos I'd taken that morning. A foggy beach, gulls suspended over the waves, and the silhouettes of fishermen steering their boats into the sea. I had captured more than images. I'd found meaning again. "I feel different," I admitted to Juniper, the words spilling out as naturally as breath. "Like I've shed a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying for years." She nodded slowly, her voice quiet. "Dad and Mom weren't fair to you. I knew it. But I was too scared to speak up. I'm sorry, Grandpa." I reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You don't need to apologize, sweetheart. You were just a child, and it wasn't your job to stand up for me. You were doing your best in a difficult situation. But I could have visited you at Pine Grove," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "I promised myself I would, but I never did." "You're here now," I said, smiling at her. "And that's what matters." Just then, my phone rang. It was Maria, inviting me to a poetry night at the local library. I accepted, and when I hung up, I noticed Juniper eyeing me with a curious grin. "Who was that?" she asked with a knowing smile. "A friend," I replied, and to my surprise, I felt myself blushing like a schoolboy. "Maria Pringle. We met during the photography course." "Just a friend?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. "Or a special friend?" I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Maria and I had never really defined what we were, but I knew how much I looked forward to seeing her, how I noticed the way she styled her hair, her perfume, her laugh. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I really enjoy spending time with her." Juniper's smile grew into something radiant. "I'm so happy for you, Grandpa. You deserve to be happy." By early June, nearly 3 months after I sold the house, the guest house was complete. It was more than I ever imagined, spacious, full of light, with wide windows overlooking the bay. Every detail had been thoughtfully designed for comfort and accessibility. No steps or thresholds, handrails in the bathroom, wide doorways for the future should I need a walker or wheelchair. Nicholas hosted a small housewarming celebration. He invited Vincent and his nephew, Juniper, my nurse Vivian Davis, and a few friends from the photography course. Jaden and Josephine weren't included, though I knew they were still in Henlopen Acres, now renting a place nearby. As I stood on the terrace of my new home, a glass of champagne in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. True, unshakable peace. The bay stretched out before me, just as it had 40 years ago when Hannah and I first stood in this same spot, dreaming about the future. The sky was painted in warm shades of pink and gold, the sunset spilling over the water like melted light, just as it had done during so many quiet evenings we shared. "To new life," Nicholas said, lifting his glass. "To a new life," the others echoed. Maria was beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt like I had truly come home. Juniper was chatting with Vincent, laughing easily at his jokes, while Vivian arranged the appetizers on the table, occasionally glancing my way with a quiet, approving smile. I lifted my glass and added a toast of my own. To the lessons life teaches us, no matter how late they come. To the courage it takes to begin again, even when the clock seems to be ticking down. To the simple act of choosing how we live every single day. The room responded with a chorus of clinking glasses and warm cheers, and the conversation carried on. But I lingered for a moment, standing quietly and gazing out at the bay, letting the weight of everything that had brought me here settle gently in my chest. Betrayal and healing, endings and beginnings, doors closed and others unexpectedly opened. I didn't feel bitterness toward Jaden or Josephine, not anymore. I hadn't fully forgiven them, but I had accepted the truth. They made their choices, and I made mine. Maybe, one day, we'd find our way back to understanding. Maybe not. That no longer felt urgent. What mattered now was something far simpler and far more powerful. At 77, I had finally learned what it meant to put myself first, to say no to those who tried to bend my will, to say yes to new chances, fresh joys, and the small freedoms I had once believed were no longer mine. I had stopped dwelling on the past and stopped fearing the future. For the first time, I was simply living, here and now. Maria's hand touched my arm gently. "What are you thinking about, Roman?" she asked, her voice low and warm. I turned to her, a woman of quiet grace, with intelligent eyes and silver hair pinned in elegant waves, and felt something soft and certain stir inside me. "About how it's never too late to begin again," I said, taking her hand in mine, "and how grateful I am for every step that led me to this moment, even the painful ones. Because without them, I wouldn't be here, with you, with all of this." We stood together in silence, side by side, watching the sun sink into the bay. And in that stillness, I realized what I'd been searching for all along. Not just a house, but a place where I truly belonged. Not just peace, but the freedom to be wholly, unapologetically myself. I found happiness not in wealth or accomplishments, but in life's simplest treasures, in laughter shared, in the warmth of a hand resting in mine, in the golden glow of a sunset that promised another day ahead. A day that would belong entirely to me. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.